What's up, guys? You're watching Li-Fi TCG. There's been a big shakeup in the Pauper format this week. 3 bans and 2 unbans. So Daily Dispute banned, Basking Broodscale is banned, and Cold Oath Rebirth is banned. And unbanned, we've had High Tide and Prophetic Prism. Now, Prophetic Prism's been banned for quite a while. So the Tron deck, for ages, it's only been able to play Energy Refractor as its mana fixing. So now that Prophetic Prism is also back in the format, it's going to be a huge boost to the Tron deck because the mana fixing, not having to pay effectively 1 extra mana every time you want to fix a color, is a big upgrade over Energy Refractor just generally, and now we can even play both. So on the screen here is a list that I played, the most recent Tron deck that I played, which I haven't really played in Pauper for quite a long time. So you see here I have 2 Nature's Claim in the sideboard, and that's because the last time I played this deck was when all that glitters was in the format. So definitely what you see here is slightly out of date. So we want to add 4 Prophetic Prism. We're going to put these back into the deck. Add 4, no question about it. And then what are we going to cut? So a natural suggestion would be to cut Energy Refractor or some number of them. But I think actually starting off with all 8 of these is the right move. Eventually you might trim like 1 or 2 Energy Refractors if you determine that you really need the extra space for some other critical effect. But the difference between having one of these cards and not having one in play is so enormous. And in multiples, the redundancy is not that bad because they all just cycle by paying 2 mana anyway. So for starters, I think the assumption is that we want to be playing all 8. So then what are we going to cut? So before we had these, how many counterspells were we playing? 5. So we had Prohibit, Memory Lapse, Unwind, Exclude, and Condescend. So I think this is a natural place to start trimming cards. So Exclude is a bit of like a value play. It's only good if the format's sort of slow enough to warrant it, and it's not strictly necessary when you have Memory Lapse, which can counter any spell anyway. And Condescend is also a little bit narrow. It's good to smooth your draws with the Scry too, but not ideal maybe in the late game when your opponent might have quite a bit of extra mana to pay for it. So I think we'll trim these 2 as well. This version of the list that you can see here had 2 win conditions, the Dinrova Horror and the Meteorite. So both of these are like quite serviceable cards in their own right. I think the color fixing that the Meteorite gave you is less important now that you have 4 Prophetic Prism back in the deck. And relying on just Meteorite as your win condition is a little bit more fragile than Dinrova Horror, because Dinrova Horror you can get back with Pulse of Murasa, and of course Pulse of Murasa you can get back with Mnemonic Wall, so you're a little bit more resilient into like removal and counter spells and things like that. Whereas with Meteorite, if you keep that as your only win condition, you have to be very careful not to let it get hit by a removal spell or like duressed or somehow you like randomly mill over it or anything like that. So I think if you have to cut one of these win conditions, you've got to cut the Meteorite. And then the last card to cut, I think all of these cards are pretty important. So 3 counterspells kind of feels like the minimum, so we'll put these back. Unwind I think is pretty good. It lets you do the infinite combo with the Weather the Storm. And it helps you just to like ramp your mana to play Mystical Teachings or something. Really keep your foot on the gas while being interactive, so that's pretty strong. So I think the cut, you could either cut 1 Mnemonic Wall, maybe the Breath Weapon, maybe one of the Fogs, but like going down to 1 Moment's Peace, 1 Tangle feels a bit scary. Crop rotation is also maybe cuttable. It makes Bojuka Bog a bit worse, but I think you probably have to keep that just for the sake of your mana base. So I think the fourth cut for me here is probably Breath Weapon, especially after the Cold Oath of Rebirth ban. It's not that clear that the popular red deck will be reliant on lots of small creatures. They might go back to the like Pinger version with Thermo Alchemist and stuff. So at least on week one, I assume that maybe Breath Weapon is a bit more of a sideboard card. So I think for day one of the format, that I'd play a main deck that looks like this. Um, so I think this mana base is really strong. So the 3 Lórien Revealed is essentially part of the mana base. So you have the red dual land to cast all of your Pyroblast and stuff in your sideboard. That's very important in the interactive matchups. You have the green dual land to cast all of your fogs and your life gain effects and stuff in game one. You have 1 cycling land to get with Expedition Map in long games where you want your maps to do something other than just find Urza's Tower. So there's another option now. Instead of Remote Isle, you can play new card. Oops, not Night Market. Night Market from the Ether Drift set. It's just taking a while to load, I think. This one. So it's like a Remote Isle that makes any color, but it costs 1 more to cycle it. So it's not exactly clear whether that's better than Remote Isle or not. So you have some slightly more flexibility in case you draw it together with your like basic island. You can have the option to put Night Market on like red or green to play another color as well. But costing 1 more to cycle is a bit relevant also, so that's not so clear, but that's an option as well. One of these effects is definitely needed just so you can find untapped mana of any color off of Expedition Map or Crop Rotation. So there's this one which scries. There's other ones that also surveil 1. It's not like really exactly clear which of those is better. There's some games where like you see a card on top early and you don't want to draw it early, but you also don't want to mill it to expose it to graveyard hate. But also there's other times where like you could play Crystal Grotto, or the Surveil one, and put like a Mystical Teachings or whatever in your graveyard so you can use it later. So yeah, it's not super clear whether Surveil or Scry is better, but I think either one of those is better than the one that adds the counters. The 2 +1/+1 counters, that effect's not really worth it. I think Scry 1 or Surveil 1 is much better. And then just the 1 Bog is the token piece of graveyard hate. And this Dig Site I'm still playing. I think this card's fantastic. When I look at other people's lists and they're not playing it, I think this is the biggest thing that they're missing. Like all this other stuff is a little bit harder to argue, like which mix of counter spells you should play, like how many fogs do you want, all this kind of thing is like very minor. But adding this land is quite free, especially now that you have Prism and Refractor. Your colored mana requirements are so much easier to meet without this Tocasia's Dig Site needing to be like a Sea Gate or some other non-basic land instead. And the repeatable Surveil for only 3 mana is super strong. So yeah, then there's other versions of Tron that people play with more crop rotations and fewer maps. This is just the way that I've always liked to play it. I think now with these 8 prism effects, you're less. It's less necessary to have to play a non-Tron land on turn 1 and 2, which is often how you end up playing crop rotation. Like if your first land drop is like a Sea Gate naming green, or like Thriving Isle naming green, or Rimewood Falls, or Thornwood Falls, like the life gain one. Sometimes people play more copies of that. So if you have a ton of those, more crop rotations can be better. But because of all of these filtering artifacts now, you don't necessarily need all of those dual lands in your deck so much. So you're less likely to draw them, you're less likely to play them early in the game on turn 1. So crop rotation's a bit worse, I think. But it's still not bad just to have one extra piece of fixing, like a 5th expedition map, essentially. And you can also find it off the mystical teachings. So I've already talked about the counterspells. This is just like the defensive package that I always like to play. Roughly that many fogs plus the Weather the Storm always feels good to me. The Flicker package, this is like your win condition. And then you have Mulldrifter and Teachings for value. So you can maybe play only 2 Mnemonic Wall. For example, you could play like another Mystical Teachings over the 3rd Mnemonic Wall, or like bring your Breath Weapon or something in from the sideboard. That's pretty fine as well. I just like having 3 Mnemonic Walls. It makes the deck a little bit better at grinding. It makes your setup of your Flicker combo a little bit more consistent. And then the 4 Impulse, like, I think either one of the 4 Impulse or the 3rd Mnemonic Wall, one of these cards is probably the most cuttable if you desperately want to fit something else. So it's not clear to me that Impulse is still the best card for this slot, especially when you have 4 Energy Refractor plus 4 Prophetic Prism in the deck now. Like, your mana curve on 2 is already pretty well accounted for. So like, for example, if you're playing Prophetic Prism on turn 2, then on turn 3, rather than play Impulse, would that be better if it was like a, like a Forbidden Alchemy or like a Compulsive Research or something, right? But there'll be enough games where you have like Island plus Tron land plus Impulse, and like that's what you need to Impulse into your 3rd land drop. Or like in the mid to late game, Impulse is just like 2 mana, digs pretty deep, instant speed. So just for consistency and everything, Impulse is still pretty good. But yeah, if you wanted to alter something in the main deck, I think like this is what I would do. Like, you could cut one of these for anything you prefer. You can cut the Dinrova Horror and play like Rolling Thunder or Murmuring Mystic or something instead, if you prefer having another win con, or like the Meteorite maybe as well. And then if you don't like Memory Lapse, you can play a different counterspell. I just like having Memory Lapse because it gives you coverage to counter anything. Like if your opponent plays like a Avenging Hunter or something, like Prohibit and Unwind can't hit it, but Memory Lapse can. So maybe this has to be like Counterspell or Exclude or something, so that your counterspells have coverage versus any type of threat. But yeah, I just like the Memory Lapse. Having Memory Lapse in the deck can also stop you from decking, which comes up very rarely, but it does matter sometimes, where you Memory Lapse your own spells when you have the flicker loop going, so you don't mill out. But yeah, that's the main deck. And then onto the sideboard, like I said, these Nature's Claims were here in the sideboard basically to deal with all that glitters, and that's not part of the format anymore, so assume that those are out. Condescend was just like a random thing to fill the curve. If you decided that you wanted to be more interactive, for example, like cutting some number of Impulse for Condescend is probably fine, but I wouldn't do that in the dark. Like, I'd have to play games versus the metagame and see that like Impulse is too slow before I did something like that. But that's another option that you could definitely consider. But for now, I think Condescend will also be out. Then, I mean, Meteorite, this is not a card that you will play in the sideboard, so that's out as well. I think now that you have all of these competing for slots, like, you can only really afford to play one win con in the main deck, or in the entire 75 even. So now our sideboard's down to 15 cards, so I think this looks not bad, right? You have 4 Hydros, 4 Pyros, a Dispel, Cast Down, Exclude. Then you have some Artifact hate, you have Gorilla Shaman and Ancient Grudge. more life gain, and then a sweeper. So I think something like this will be a good place to start for Tron with Prism Unban. And if you've never played with this card in Tron before, like you might be surprised about how strong it is. Like getting the colored filtering for free without having to pay one extra like you do with Refractor is a big deal. And the deck has never had the combo of all 8 of these before. Like I've played it quite a few games with this in the past week or so, and the mana with this is so consistent now. It really plays like so much smoother than it ever has before. So if your opponent's going to be playing a lot of like Arbor Elf into Thermocast or whatever, that's still a really bad matchup. Don't get me wrong, but against any type of like fair deck, like if your opponent's doing core Skyfisher stuff or things like that, like all of those matchups feel super free. Yeah, like the mana is just so consistent now, and all the rest of the deck is just as strong as it ever was. So yeah, this is probably going to be my favorite deck of the current Pauper format. And if there's any local events or whatever in paper, I'm definitely going to be sleeving it up and bringing it along. So yeah, let me know what you think of Tron in the current Pauper format with this latest unban. Any cards that you think that I've missed or you're curious about, just let me know in the comments below. This has been Li-Fi TCG signing out.